Welcome to the first of the Marble Hill Autumn Lecture Series, entitled How Marble Hill Was Revived, The Secrets Behind the Paintworks. My name is Rachel Morrison, I'm your host for this evening. Before we start, a few bits of housekeeping. Please do ask our speaker lots of questions, and you can do that by going to the chat function that's at the bottom of the screen. It looks like a little speech bubble, and if you click onto that, then you can ask our speaker lots of questions throughout the talk, and at the end we'll pose them to her to be able to answer all of your questions that you have today. This will be recorded, and this will be on the Marble Hill YouTube channel for you to enjoy at a later stage too, and tell all your friends about Marble Hill. So why are we doing these talks? Well, Marble Hill has been revived, and it's been a really exciting opportunity that the house is now open for free 5 days a week from Wednesday to Sunday. And we've got the most amazing volunteers who are part of the Marble Hill story. Also, the landscape has been revived, and we're very grateful for our volunteers, but also the wonderful English Heritage team who've made it possible. And if you want to know more, there is a lecture about the landscape transformation later in the Marble Hill lecture series. We've got a great cafe where you can have a lovely cup of tea and know that with every sip, you're giving back to the charity that has made this all happen. And of course, our sports facilities have been improved for the community. But we've also been doing a raft of different events, and this is part of those events, and it's the second of our autumn lecture series, and it is wonderful to have the very fantastic Rachel Turnbull with us today. She is the Senior Collections Conservator for English Heritage, and throughout the project, her work has been intrinsic in being able to change and shape the Marble Hill Revived project. She cares for over 1,500 paintings for English Heritage across the country, and has inspired all of us with her vision and her enthusiasm, both in our volunteers and those of us who've worked with her. So without further ado, let me pass you on to Rachel Turnbull.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am going to start sharing my screen. Tonight, I'm going to talk about some of the investigations and research that went on behind the scene as we were preparing to carry out all of the work at Marble Hill. Just a little bit to start off about who I am and what my role is very quickly at English Heritage. I'm actually a paintings conservator, and as Rachel said, I look after around 1,500 paintings across the country from a studio in London, where we carry out restorations, cleaning paintings, lining paintings, structural treatment. But we also do lots of work on site. And that was the first phase of works that we did actually at Marble Hill when the project started to empty the house of all the collections so the works could start. And we did a lot of work at the beginning of the project to make the paintings safe before they left. I'm not going to talk about that very much today, but I am going to talk to you about the Great Room, which is the main room in Marble Hill House, if you know it. It's on the first floor. It's a double height room. You can see I've put a cross section up of the house, and the pale area in the middle is the sort of the void that is the Great Room, and it's the room that looks out across the river. So I'm going to start by talking to you about the decoration inside the room. The image on the left-hand side is what the house, what that room looked like when we started the project. And I'm just going to run through some discoveries that we made, confirming some things that we thought we knew, but we did some research to just make sure that we were sure about that. And then after we've talked about that, I'm going to focus in on a few specific objects in this room. As it's the room in the house that contains the most objects that were in the house when Henrietta was living at Marble Hill. So as I said, the image on the left is the Great Room before the project started. And we embarked on a process of trying to understand the decorative history of the space. Now, just like any of us at home, people like to redecorate, fashions change. And over the last 300 years, there have been many changes in the Great Room at Marble Hill. And this is quite a complicated slide to look at. But what I've tried to do is give you a flavour of some of the main changes on a sort of timeline running from left to right, from the beginning when the house was built right through until the present day. So the images on the bottom, the first slide is a sort of, looks like a blank space, but it's showing that the first decorative scheme in the Great Room was a kind of off-white grey cream scheme with brown woodworks, and obviously we don't have photographic images to show that, so I've just indicated it with the colours. And we then know that there was a blue scheme for a very short period of time after Henrietta died and the house was in the ownership of successive relatives. And then the house was sold, and we think it was at this time, after around 1824, that the house, that the Great Room was given a rather exotic wood-grained and gold decoration. And I shall show you some more slides of that in a second. And then in the 1960s, when the London Council took on the site, it was discovered that it was white and cream originally, and there was also an assumption made that that there was a lot of gilding and the carved areas were gilded, and that was the scheme that was put in, and that was in that room when we took on the project. Now, we started a whole phase of investigations and research to actually prove that all of this was true, and to decide what to do with the decoration of that room moving forward. And in the end, what we decided was that we would like to return it back to the original scheme that Henrietta would have known during her lifetime, which is what you can see today. So how did we do that? So this is, in a way, also like a timeline, but in this case, it's reading from the bottom to the top. The image on the left-hand side is what's called a cross-section. It's a tiny flake of paint that's taken from the woodwork of the main panels of the wall. It was taken by Crick Smith, who are architectural paint historians and conservators, in 2018, to help us really clarify that timeline of decorative finishes. So if you look from the bottom of the slide, what you can actually see is a little nick of wood, then the first pale off-white creamy grey layers that we talked about that were present during Henrietta's lifetime, then the blue layer, which was only very short-lived, it was only repeated once, and then it was followed by the wood grain layer, which you can see are those sort of warmer colours, and the dark layers which bisect the middle of the sample. And then in the 20th century, there were multiple sort of off-white schemes culminating in the scheme that was put on in the 1960s by the council. So just to set the scene a little bit more, there is photographic evidence of the wood grain scheme that was still present in the early 20th century. So these images are taken around 1900. And you can see that the scheme was to replicate all sorts of exotic woods, burwoods, walnuts, that kind of thing. And also at this point, the original paintings, the big paintings that were original to the room, were still in situ. You can see the corner of one of the Paninis, which I'll talk about later, up in the top left-hand corner of the first image, and then also a copy after Van Dyck, the big painting that's next to it. And then in the image on the right, that's actually looking up at the ceiling, where there were cherubs and sky and clouds depicted. We were quite interested to discover whether this scheme was still extant. So we did some research. We obviously had the paint analysis done by Crick Smith, which indicated it was still there. But we also wanted particularly to understand what was happening on the ceiling, because as part of the redecorations, we were worried that there were areas of flaking paint, and if the original scheme was still there on the ceiling, we didn't want to compromise the existence of that not original scheme, but that earlier scheme by anything that we did. So we did some further work, and you can see the black and white photo is from around 1912. At this point, you can see that the paintings, the original to the room, have been removed. And you can see that some paint has flaked off just above, just where the ceiling begins to curve round. And you can see that some of the wood graining is still there, which confirmed that we needed to be careful as we proceeded with the project. We were also really interested to know whether or not the ceiling painting survived, and so further on in the project, when we could get high level access, because obviously the room is double height, we needed a big scaffold. So on the image on the left, you can see looking up at the ceiling. We commissioned some wall paintings conservators, Payne and Stewart, to come and have a look. And again, it was for the same reason that you can see in the little square on the bottom right that the paint is very, very flaky, and that's on quite a large scale. So we commissioned them to first of all establish that they thought that the cherubs are still there, but then also to do some conservation work to protect the paint that survived. And what they did was they used some conservation grade consolidant along with some Japanese tissue to stabilize those flaking areas. And then the ceiling was lined with some lining paper, as you would put on your wall before it was decorated. And that means that in the future, that the remains of that the scene with the cherubs and the clouds is still there. We don't think it's in very good condition. The paint they could see was incredibly fragile and powdery. And I don't think it would be possible to easily uncover it, certainly with today's skills. And also the written sources that we have from the 1930s actually indicate that although from this little black and white image of it, it looks quite fun, that perhaps it wasn't the best quality. And as far as I'm aware, we don't know who painted it, and it didn't fit in. We were not going to uncover it at this point in time either, because it didn't fit in with the representation of the house as it was in the latter years of Henrietta's residency there. So after all of the research, as I said, we decided that the house was going to be represented as it was during Henrietta's lifetime. So the gold that was only found during the 1960s, so the very bright gold was from the 1960s, it's not earlier, and so we have not removed it, it's still there, but it's being covered up with new paint to present this beautiful Palladian interior as we think it was during her lifetime, a much cooler affair than it was after the interpretation in the 1960s. So alongside all of this work on the room surfaces, the walls and the ceilings, we were also looking at one of the few remaining pieces of furniture at Marble Hill that we know is indigenous to the site. There is the earliest inventory that we have from 1767 notes that there were two large marble topped tables and two small marble top tables, and unfortunately 3 of those are no longer around that we know, but one of them was discovered. It was found in the 1980s out in Australia, and we know that it had been removed from the house at some point by a tenant, and his son had gone out to Australia, so it's at least possible that he took it with him. And when it was found in Australia, it was actually found with the receipt from the auction from the mid 1850s. So we knew for sure that it was the table that was at Marble Hill. It was carved by, we think, by a man called James Richards, who was a master carver around 1730. And it might be after a design by William Kent, although it has been difficult to prove that beyond doubt. There are other pieces of furniture and drawings from William Kent that do have many similarities with our table. So that is a picture of the table as it was before the project. We only had one table. I think you can see in that image that the color of the gold on the table is not really gold. It looks rather bronzy in tone. And we knew that actually it wasn't gold. It was a sort of a metal leaf that was put on to imitate gold, but it has darkened and oxidized with time. And it really looks sort of rather confusing against the other elements and the other items in the room. At the beginning of the project, curatorially, we wanted, if possible, to make its pair, to recreate its pair. But before we did that, we needed to really fully understand the object itself. We didn't want to replicate some fake gold and white paint that was on the table at the time. And in these two small details, I hope you can see that what looks like cracks through the white, which is latex sort of modern paint, it's actually been scored on with a Stanley knife to sort of pretend that it's a much older finish than it actually is, but it's all dating most likely from the early 20th century. And obviously we didn't want to spend a lot of time replicating something that was not correct. So we did the same process as with on the walls. So this is another little cross section, these tiny paint flakes, like a sort of a pinhead size. And then what happens is you mount them in resin and then you grind through. And it's a little bit like looking at a slice of cake with them. And what you can see is the icing and the layers of cake and the icing on the top and the icing in the middle and the layers of cake. And what you can see in this sample on the very top is this sort of fake gold leaf, and then the red layer is the bowl that was put on. But gratifyingly, when we looked at the sample and compared it to the work that had already been done by Crick Smith, this sample was taken by furniture conservator Tristram Bainbridge, who carried out the conservation on the table. It matched up beautifully with the stratigraphy that we could see on the actual walls. So we already knew, because of the catalogue that was found with the table, that the provenance was correct and it was from Marble Hill. But this allowed us to be absolutely sure that it had been in that room for a long period of time, because we can mirror the same decorative schemes throughout the sample that we took from the table. So initially there were some white layers, and then there was the wood graining that we've talked about, followed by the gold paint, the gold leaf or fake gold leaf that was put on, but later, once the table had left the house. So it left the house as a dark wood grained object. What that told us was that, and we did extensive numbers of these little tiny samples right into the tiny bits of carving to make sure that we were getting the same layer structure in all of the places, because we were really keen to establish that for sure there was no gold on this table right at the beginning of its life, and we found no gold at all, which allowed us to proceed with actually restoring the table to the same period, to the same scheme that Henrietta would have known for the majority of her life at Marble Hill. We put out a commission for a pear piece to be made, and gratifyingly, the best way to do this was to hand carve it. And this was made, the hand carving was made at W. Thomas Restorations, a wonderful carver called Ray Dubman. He also used some apprentices on this carving, because it was such a an interesting thing to be able to do. On the left is the original table, but with the sort of the fake gold and latex paint removed. and on the right is the carving in process of the second table. And one of the reasons that that it was necessary to carry out the carving by hand is because the peacocks needed to face each other. We didn't want them both facing the same way, so that you couldn't really have gone down the route of anything fancy like a digital scan and print. That there are things that can be done like that today, but we were really pleased that actually the way forward was to do the carving. Ray and his team also replaced quite a few lost areas on the original table. Some had never been repaired, and some had some rather nasty resin repairs that were not well shaped. And because they were working so closely with the table, they were able to put those all back together beautifully. And here are the two peacocks. One lovely detail that they pointed out to us in the carve in the studio was that the tummy of the original peacock on the left hand side has been rubbed smooth. So when they made the replica, they didn't replicate that sort of rubbed smooth appearance, but they popped back his feathers. So they now face each other and in the room. Alongside the physical evidence that we took with the samples from the table itself and from the room itself, we also, the curatorial team, were also doing a significant amount of research looking at other historical precedents. And this is just one example to show a table that this is from the V&A. It's the Longford table. It's of the same period, and I think you can see, although the motifs are different, it is very similar to our table. And that's the table as it is now. Interestingly, we the paint finish was something that we worked really hard. The paint, the type of paint that we used, it's made with a resin called B72, paraloid B72, which is a conservation material that stays incredibly stable and soluble with time. So the older layers that were left on the peacock table are all still there underneath, and should someone want to investigate that further in the future, they could easily do so and remove this cool paint that we have put on. Another nice detail, just to, if we wanted any more confirmation that this is the table from Marble Hill, what you're looking at there is actually the replica, but it's just the photo that I've got, is that if you look at the skirting board, the decorative element on top of the skirting board, it matches up exactly with the carving on the table itself, showing that it was designed to sort of sit within that space and up against the wall. And there is a picture of the two tables back in situ, underneath the pier glasses as we think that they were. The one on the left is the original, and the one on the right is the carved replica. So I briefly mentioned on a previous slide that the three large paintings in the Great Room had been removed from the house in the early 20th century. So there were two Van Dycks and one copy after Rubens. When the house was represented to be open to the public in the later 20th century, three large paintings were bought from a country house sale of the correct kind of period and subject matter. So the three paintings that are in there now are not the original paintings from the Great Room, but they are the right kind of thing and the right kind of subject matter for the house. You can see us here working in situ in the Great Room during the installation last autumn. And these enormous paintings hadn't been properly cleaned for a very long time, probably 50 years or so. So we were lucky enough to have some students from the Courtauld Institute of Art come and help us, and we set about doing some conservation in situ. They were far too big to come to my studio, so they had to be done there in situ. I'll show you that in a second, but just to note on this slide that the man in the middle, who's looking up at what is actually a large plastic carton water is testing the mechanism for the chandelier that was put in the 20th century. There's a winching mechanism that will take it up and down. So they're in the process of making sure that all of that works properly. So we were working in situ on the paintings. They were fairly minor treatments. I'm kneeling down there and I'm actually consolidating some paint where it has got very flaky and it's very difficult to see, but what I've actually got there is a little tiny, we call it a hot spatula, but if you imagine an iron, but just on a much smaller scale and much more controllable temperature. And what we do is that we can put some conservation glue effectively into the cracks and around the raised areas of paint, and with some very gentle pressure and heat from our little hot spatula, we can lay those paint flakes back down and help them ease into place. And then the other thing we were able to do is clean the paintings. So that's removing surface dirt. And in the detail on the right, if you look very carefully, I've got what we call a swab stick with a little roll of cotton wool on the end. And I think you can just about see on the little child's forehead that it's very dark at the end of that little piece of white cotton wool. And that's the surface dirt that's coming off. And what we used in this situation was saliva. It actually is a very good thing to clean surface dirt off paintings. We cleared it subsequently with water, so we didn't leave the saliva on the paintings, but your saliva breaks down oils and fats with the enzymes that you have in your mouth. And so actually for surface dirt and grease and grime from household interiors on paintings, it's also a really good thing to do, although please don't try it yourself at home, because if you've got the wrong kind of painting, you can always accidentally take paint off. They are now looking a lot brighter and a lot cleaner, and that's really good. So the other 5 paintings that are in the Great Room are the 5 paintings by Panini. And these were in the house at the time when Henrietta was living there. They also left the house in the early 20th century, but luckily enough, we were able to buy them back later on in the 20th century in the 1990s. I think I mentioned right at the beginning that most of the work that we did to the paintings was on the way when they left the house for storage during the restoration of the building itself. And we had done some work to the framing and the fitting of these paintings. But the project on the way back in, it gave us the opportunity with a little bit of time. It gave us the opportunity to really have a look at these and examine them a little more closely. They're what's known as capriccios, so they're not actual views of Rome. They are confections made up of real ruins and real buildings, but put together in a sort of pleasing landscape. We'd been lucky enough during the last few years during COVID to get some money to buy some new pieces of equipment. We were able to purchase an infrared camera, which is what you can see on the sort of flat tripod. There's a square blue box at the top of that image, and we're on site at Marble Hill looking at one of the Paninis. Now, an infrared image, quite usually in conservation, is used to look at underdrawing from that the artist would have done before they painted an image. It can, though, also show changes, compositional changes. And we had slightly spotted something on this Panini. It's the one that hangs as you're looking at the river on the right-hand side above the door. And if you're get your eye in and you're very clever, you can possibly see that there is a change on the left-hand side. There's something funny going on. Now, if I zoom in and show you the infrared image, which is the black and white image on the left-hand side, the artist has made a significant change rather late on in the painting of the picture. He's started off with a large image of the Colosseum, and then for reasons that we don't understand, he has decided to get rid of the Colosseum and paint that out and paint the sky and the clouds over the top. He has used some of the paint from the Colosseum in the ruined building, the ruined structure, which is still existent today. But he has painted out a certain element of it on the left. And also there are other details. He obviously got quite a long way down this kind of composition. So in that red circle, you can also see there's a different bust. So he must have had a different sculpture in the first version. Why he made that change, I don't know. But there are other Paninis that we know of that have also got changes. So that's it. It's a little insight into some of the findings from the Great Room, the objects and the decoration. Yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think it really just shows how unbelievably careful you and the team are about restoring things to be as true as you possibly can make them. So thank you so much. So this is your opportunity, everyone, to be able to ask lots of questions. So I'm going to ask Rachel to unshare her screen, and we will take questions from the floor. And you can do that by going through that chat function that's at the very bottom of your screen. We have got our first question, which is how did you get into this world of conservation?
I was super lucky. When I was at school, my teacher suggested it to me. I was 16 years old and it stuck. I liked art. I didn't want to be an artist, and that's it. I never forgot that. And lots of people said, "Don't do it. There are no jobs and there's no money," but I was just determined that that's what I was going to do. And I've been also very lucky along the way and have had some great jobs in some great institutions. So yeah, it was a good teacher.
Definitely was a good teacher. I'm so pleased they got it so bang on.
Yeah.
They told me I should be an undertaker. I haven't followed that route. But you know, kind of, and it's lovely that you're able to inspire people, because it was great to hear that there were lots of young people that were involved in the work, whether that be apprenticeships in the Peacock table or the team from the court hold. I know that's something you feel very passionate about sharing. And what drives you? What drives you in that respect?
Well, I mean, I'm only here doing what I do because I was given opportunities to volunteer and work in different places when I was younger and studying. I used to work at Orleans House, so right next door to Marble Hill, as a young 20-year-old, did all sorts of weird and wonderful jobs at Orleans House, and if you're not given opportunities by the people that are in that position to do it, then you're never going to you know, be able to make your way. So yeah, give a little bit back, because I was lucky enough to be on the receiving end when I was younger.
Well, we're very grateful for that, and it's fantastic that you're inspiring so many of us, whether they are young or very old like me. Also, kind of, you're involved in lots of other properties for English Heritage, and I think kind of one of their team have asked about how you use the infrared in other properties. It was a real discovery at Marble Hill. Have you had further discoveries across the EH collection? The way that we're going to approach it, because it's a really useful piece of kit. Sometimes you can guess that there might be something to see, but sometimes you don't know what's there until you use it. So it's going to be, well, already is part of our arsenal of techniques and things that we do to every painting that comes to the studio. What have we found? We've looked at some paintings from Ranger's House up here in Blackheath, and we found a couple of little early Netherlandish panels, and we were able to, it's a crucifixion, and we were able to see that the Christ figure has got an extra head.
and the artist had made a change and actually sort of made the head you see today is much smaller and at a slightly different angle. And then there are various other extra people and all sorts of funny things like that going on. So yeah, we will be getting more and more out of it as we go along. And it's really exciting, because once you put it on a painting, you do not know what you're going to find. You don't know until you do it. So it'll be watch this space, and if we find anything super exciting, we'll be letting everybody know.
Wonderful. Art detectives would love it. And of course, you look after many paintings. So what is your favourite one? And of course, you've got to say Marble Hill, but there must be many that you are very fond of.
Oh, that's a terrible question. I have a stock answer to this question, which not everybody likes, but you tend to get really excited about the thing that you're working on, because we spend so much time with a painting, you know, something big that's having a complex treatment. We could easily spend 300 hours looking at one item. So you have to kind of really like the thing that's in front of you. So what we're looking at the moment are lots of paintings by Reynolds. So next year is the 300th anniversary of his birth, Joshua Reynolds, and we have across many sites at English Heritage many paintings by Joshua Reynolds. He painted very quickly, I think, with lots of assistants in his studio, and he's notoriously difficult for conservators to look after. But we are doing lots and lots of research, as are many other institutions across the UK at the moment, into Joshua Reynolds, and trying to find some interesting things out and perhaps restore a couple in advance of next year. So watch this space. There'll be things happening hopefully at Kenwood House, where we have many paintings by Reynolds.
Fantastic. And obviously Kenwood is free to visit as well as Marble Hill, so it's nice to be able to share that London love.
Yeah.
But this is the last one, Rachel, what is your favourite painting in the Marble Hill arsenal? Come on.
In Marble Hill. Okay, what do I like in Marble Hill? Well, I'm going to say that Panini, because it surprises all. That's been on the wall, and once you see that Colosseum, if you go and visit Marble Hill and you look at that painting, now you know it's there, you will not miss it. So I think it's that one, because even though I've stood in that room over the last 10 years and looked at that painting 100 times, I hadn't spotted it until the day it came back after the project. And suddenly I went, oh, we're going to look at that a bit more closely. And there it was. So things surprise you all the time. And that every painting has got a story to tell. And that was the one that got us this time at Marble Hill. So well,
thank you so much for the most fascinating talk, and we are so indebted, Rachel, for all your amazing work at Marble Hill, but also all that you do across the country. If you would like to support the work of Marble Hill and indeed English Heritage Charity, all you need to do is to become a member. That's the best way to be able to support us and support the many properties that we look after, which are both free and also paid for. So do become a member, or just come and see Marble Hill and buy a lovely cup of coffee. You can do that and support us. There's lots going on at Marble Hill. We've got Arts in the Park, Richmond Live. That's on the weekend, so a bit of pop in the park. And also we've got a Baroque concert on Monday at the house. Of course, we've got the Luminaries lectures, so 14 properties working together to celebrate our collective heritage, and of course the next lectures. So next week we've got Lauren Etheridge and Jill Calder, and Jill is the illustrator who has made the most beautiful pictures across Marble Hill in both the house and the landscape. And then we will be joined by John Watkins and Emily Parker to talk about the restoration of the landscape. And then the last one is around the community work that's been part of the project. So we really hope to see you at all of those, and please do come and join us at Marble Hill at the beautiful house of Henrietta Howard, and we would love to see you there. A huge thanks, Rachel, for your time today, and it's been great to have you with us and wonderful to have your expertise as part of the Marble Hill Revive project.
Pleasure.
Thank you everyone, and good night. Take care. Bye-bye.